Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Mark Johnson, Editorial Board Chair for CDO Magazine and Regional Vice President at Fusion Alliance. CDO Magazine's been gathering input from global CDOs that have been evaluating products in the data and analytics industry. We're excited to feature one of the companies today that was recommended as one of the best new products of 2021. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Kaycee Lai, founder and CEO of Promethium. Kaycee, thank you for taking some time to talk with our viewers today.
Hey, thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Before we get started, why don't you take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourself, Kaycee?
Yes, so I am the founder and CEO of Promethium. I've been a data junkie, data nerd, data geek, whatever you want to call it, for most of my career, and worked in all the different stacks from infrastructure all the way up to the data, databases, data warehouses, and all the data management side. I am very, very passionate in helping customers get insights from their data, and that is actually why I started Promethium, because we just saw too many customers having too many troubles, taking too long, spending too much money, and being frustrated of not being able to extract insights from the data that they already own.
Very interesting. So what's the story behind why you started Promethium? What kind of prompted you really to think about the kind of technology amalgamation that you created and the approach that you're taking to this problem?
Yeah, I like to say the founding of Promethium was about 20 years in the making, because I actually started my career as an analyst. I was the guy that people came and yelled at when they couldn't get insights and analysis quickly enough. And I found myself always having to wait for the data. I found myself always struggling being able to understand the data, and at times feeling intimidated or even a bit powerless, because there was just a lot of coding that was actually required. And that was 20 years ago. And I got to say, I was hoping it would have gotten easier in 20 years, but it's actually gotten a lot harder, with a lot more data sources, a lot more different types of data, different locations, multiple clouds, et cetera. And so I've seen now with customers, they're getting even more intimidated. And the sad part is there's actually a bigger shortage of people who actually have these skill sets to be able to address these problems. And so I felt really personally motivated to help customers and say, hey, if I could go back in time and have this solution when Kaycee was the analyst, how awesome would it be to be able to empower all these people to be able to make decisions and not feel intimidated by the data?
Well, that's really interesting. And I think in this next question, you can share a little insight there with more depth. But you mentioned you said a word, coding, quote unquote. There was so much coding. And I think Promethium is probably going to help us with a lot less of that. So over the last 7 years, the data landscape has radically changed, expanded, and morphed, as you mentioned. Today, we have IoT streaming data, social content. We've got clickstream data, audio, video, along with even more enterprise data sources. And as you mentioned, some of those coming from the cloud, on-prem, et cetera. Given this new data landscape, what are some of the biggest challenges that companies are facing in terms of managing and analyzing their data?
Yeah, great question. I would say, number one, it's just what you described. With more data sources, there's going to be more fragmentation of data, more data types from different vendors. Everyone's going to have the data slightly differently. And unfortunately, we're living in a world where to really make meaningful insights, you have to leverage all your data. And it's not good enough to say, hey, for this data, I'm only going to use this vendor. For this one, I'm only going to use this vendor. And that's somehow going to solve all my business needs. We talk to customers all the time where it's simple thing like, hey, it's snowing. Should we change our inventory levels, or should we reroute the delivery of our products? To do that, they actually have to get data from 5 different data sources, 5 different vendors. Now, the traditional way of doing that is, can you give me 3 months and I'll ETL all the data and massage it in a nice clean format for you to use? Well, it's probably stopped snowing in 3 months, unfortunately, if you actually do wait that long. So this is where a lot of folks are really struggling, because there will always be a faster database, a data warehouse. There will be a prettier visualization tool. But the one thing that remains is the amount of manual effort, the amount of pre-work that's required to actually move the data, ETL the data, and do a lot of SQL coding to get it in a format where you can actually do something meaningful with the data. That hasn't changed in over 20 years, probably won't change anytime soon. And that is why we're so excited with what Promethium can do for users, because we do give you the ability to, on demand, ask a question, get the answers without having any pre-assembly required and without needing to do any ETL or SQL coding.
Well, I think you're really speaking to our audience, those executives who just want to get the insights, right? They're not interested in waiting for all of the reasons why IT can't deliver the question answered the way they put it forth. You mentioned earlier, I keyed on the word coding. Are you a kind of a low code or a no code kind of tool in terms of the way you're providing access to data?
Absolutely. I mean, I like to say, when I was a little kid, I remember buying toys and there would always be that tagline, some assembly required. And what some assembly required, oftentimes, depending on toy you bought, meant, your dad was going to spend, a whole weekend putting it together for you. Well, data is not that much different, except the some assembly required could be 3, 4, or sometimes 9 months. Right. And so Promethium actually really prides itself in you can actually just start using the product day one. You don't need to predefine data models. You don't have to write your SQL. You don't have to do any ETL. Like, you can literally connect your data sources, start asking questions to get insights day one. It's a little shocking. Most people don't believe it until they actually try the product and they realize they can get up to 100x productivity increase with our solution.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to have access to 100x. So I'm assuming that artificial intelligence has some role to play in the ability to compress so much time out of the equation. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you feel AI has changed the landscape or changed the game in these kinds of scenarios?
Oh, it's absolutely huge what AI has been able to do. I mean, one of the most challenging things when it comes to working with data is, unfortunately, with data, it's not so black and white. It's not that if you just do these 10 steps, you will always get what you need all the time, right? There is going to be human context involved. There is going to be learning involved. And so one of the most powerful things about AI is it can learn and it can make suggestions to the users. And that suggestion guides the users to be able to take the next step without feeling intimidated, right? By having enough context, hey, you should do this because this is what someone else has done that's in a similar role, or these are the most popular ways someone's done, or hey, let me show you the most common output. Things like that make it much less intimidating and much easier for people to follow through. And the other thing too is with AI is you now have the ability to surface something relevant before someone has requested it, right? So while it's great to do something fast, what you find is that a lot of times before you wait for someone to say, well, how about this, right? So if I'm doing revenue analysis by product, maybe I also want to know by region. Maybe I also want to know by package. Maybe I want to know by pricing. So why would I wait for someone to ask me that? If I know they're probably going to be related, doesn't it make sense to actually suggest that ahead of time? Right. And so the powerful thing about AI and ML is the machine can do a lot of this learning and then start suggesting this before you actually do it. And so that really helps you get things done a lot faster.